Greetings from the Ojai Festival in California. I'm Steve Smith, Director of Publications for National Sawdust in Brooklyn, and I have the extraordinary privilege of sitting here today with two of the, I don't exaggerate a bit, two of the architects of modern music. And if you've been watching the Ojai Festival online, or if you've had the privilege of being here in person, then you know that in a very real sense, we are all living in a world that these two men helped to shape profoundly. Muhal Richard Abrams, pianist, composer, band leader, and founder with three other gentlemen of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, the AACM, in Chicago in 1965. Roscoe Mitchell, who is one of the founders of the Art Ensemble of Chicago, one of the flagship bands to emerge from the AACM, and also one of the earliest members of the organization. So I can't overstate what a privilege it is to get to speak with the two of you. Earlier today, someone referred to the two of you and George as being sort of the Mount Rushmore of modern music, sitting together on stage earlier. It was quite a wonderful statement and quite accurate. So I want to start by just saying, Muhal, in 1965, it was you and Jody Christian and Phil Coren and Steve McCall all got together and formed this association. You already had interacted in the experimental band, which we'll talk about. But what was the formative intent of the AACM? What made you do it?
Let me start first with what comment you made in terms of Roscoe. Roscoe was the creator of the Art Ensemble of Chicago, not one of the creators. Roscoe Mitchell created the Art Ensemble of Chicago. Is that okay? Because that's what happened.
Okay.
So people, he wasn't one. He created that organization early on. Now, to get to your question, I created what I call the experimental band. And I created the experimental band because I needed a forum whereby I could compose and perform original music that I was hearing. So that was the purpose of creating the experimental band. Now, in terms of the AACM, the other three people that you mentioned sort of came to me, or we came together in some kind of way to discuss organizing a larger group of people to do the same type of thing, produce and compose and perform creative, original music, their own original music. So we, as I stated in the talk yesterday, we called a meeting of all the so-called musicians, jazz musicians and whatnot, on the South Side where we were.
Right.
And they were mainly black musicians. And so we asked who among them would be open to participating in a group that composed and performed their own original music only. And they were quite free to continue performing and composing mainstream music outside of the organization. There was no restriction from them what they do outside of, but within the organization, who would be amenable to that idea. So the people who were amenable to the idea said that they were interested. So that group had a second meeting and separated from the people who didn't want to participate in that. There were no animosities or anything, just people, went the way they wanted to go, because we never had any problems like that in Chicago. We were all still very camaraderie and friendly, because we would still play mainstream things together. However, let me get to your point. The group that decided that they would like to follow the idea of creating the their own original music only and producing it and whatnot like that, became the AACM.
And it wasn't purely about aesthetics. In fact, it wasn't about musical style at all, so much as about originality. But was it not also intended for creating opportunity?
All of that, all of that. Yeah. Well, in other words, here, the music is art as well as a business.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to speak in those terms too. Where when we spoke of creating a forum where this music could be performed, and what first composed and created and performed and rehearsed and whatnot like that, we had to have venues where we could do this. So the business of finding a venue, organizing timetables and scheduling people and whatnot like that, you know what I mean? And discussing how they could copyright their compositions. And it's, just all sorts of stuff, recording, all sorts of stuff. So it was just more than just, but nevertheless, that group became the AACM. And Roscoe was one of the original members in that group that Roscoe was there. You know what I mean? The four founders just talked it up and had this meeting, but Roscoe was already in the experimental band. He was already AACM in the sense of what that idea was. We were already doing that. So the formal organizing of the AACM just sort of enlarged our gathering.
Right,
If you want to call it that.
Well, and Roscoe, I'm grateful to Muhal for actually correcting the way that I phrased what I meant, because of course the Roscoe Mitchell Art Ensemble did in fact precede and pre-exist before the incorporation of what we came to know as the Art Ensemble of Chicago when Joseph joined, and then later when Don Moye joined just before you came back from your famous Paris sojourn. But I want to go back to 1965 and to the formation of the AACM and ask you, as a gigging musician, as an aspiring composer, as a working artist in Chicago, what did the AACM represent to you?
Let me just back up on that question. The Art Ensemble became the Art Ensemble in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
When it went to Paris, it became the Art Ensemble
Right.
of Chicago. So coming to the experimental band, what that did, that opened me up musically in so many different ways. I would say that when I got back to Chicago from the United States Army, I was in the Army band.
Mm-hmm.
All of these people were much more advanced than I was in the way that they were thinking. When I was in the Army, I had the pleasure to meet Albert Eiler. He was in the Orleans, France band.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the headquarters Usura band in Heidelberg, and both of these bands would go to Berlin, and we'd get together with them, and we'd have these big parades and so on like that. And then, of course, when a bunch of musicians get together, then you're going to have these jam sessions and stuff that come up. And Albert Eiler was there, and when I heard him playing, I didn't quite understand what he was doing, but I did know as a saxophonist that he had an enormous sound on the instrument. And it made an impression on me. Blues was being played, and he played the first few courses of the blues in a conventional type way, and then he started to just expand into this kind of sound thing. Okay, and then I also had heard Ornette Coleman when I was in the Army. Didn't quite understand what was going on with that either, okay? So it wasn't until I got out of the Army and heard Coltrane's record, it's called Coltrane.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one with Out of This World.
That's
and
right.
all of these different pieces like that. And then because I didn't think of it like that, Here he was creating improvisation using a modal method,
Right.
and so on, And so that kind of opened me up a little bit more, And then I went to the experimental band and started there, and Muhal was encouraging me to write music and so on like that. So I did that, and it was a great opportunity. It was like a workshop kind of a thing where you bring in your piece with the band, you have it played. If you didn't like it, you could take it back home and bring it back the next week and so on like that, and keep reworking the piece, you know. So eventually, you know, and then like Chicago was a place then where there was a lot of jam sessions and so on,
Right.
you know. And I used to go out to all these jam sessions, and Eddie Buster and all of them. I'd be playing, and then I kept hearing these other things, you know, and I suppressed them, you know, for a while. And then when I finally did give in to them, then they started just pouring out, you know. And that's how I made my move over into where they were musically, you
Right.
know. And well, the first group that I put together was with Dr. Fred Berry, who is the director there at Stanford of the big band and so on there. And he was in Chicago for the summer, you know, before he was going back to school there. And we had that band with him and Elvin Fielder and Malachi Favors,
Right.
the Before Sound record that just came out from 1964 on Chuck Nessa's label.
Right.
You know. So, and then I had, when Fred left, you know, and I never went out looking for musicians or anything like that, okay? So when Fred left, all of a sudden we were down at Muhal's rehearsal at Lincoln Center, and who should show up but Lester Boyd?
Right.
Right before I was getting ready to record Sound, you know. And so started talking to him. I said, look, I've got a recording session coming up. I'd like to have you on it. So we just, right then we started going to the park every day, just him and I, you know, just practicing together to get a sound together and so on like that. And of course, then after that, I mean, we started to rehearse like every day. I mean, every day, every weekday. We started off at 9 and we finished about 5 o'clock.
Right.
You know, something like that. Take the weekend off if we had a gig or something like that. I remember one time we put together some concerts on the north side at some of these clubs, and we were out there playing and so on. And pretty soon the owner came up. He said, "Look, here's your money. You know, just leave.
Yeah,
you don't have
right.
to play anymore. You know, say you don't have to play anymore. You know." So yeah, and that's the way the thing kind of went down.
Sure.
And then to me, I mean, the art ensemble had to become a collective in order to survive. You know, because here you had these people with the same vision and so on, and devoting the same amount of time, you know, to what's happening. I mean, somewhere in my drawer, I've got pay stubs from Champaign, Illinois, where I was paying people $3 or something for the concert and so on. So yeah, this is how the whole thing kind of like evolved like that.
I think one of the things that seems to be, especially in the context of, again, the Ojai Festival, where there are so many creative intersections going on between practices, between disciplines, between generations, one of the things that sort of set you apart from the first, I mean, you've both spoken just now about how all of this was happening early on in a jazz context, and yet you weren't the association for jazz composers. You weren't the jazz composers anything. It was about original composition. And that's a really key thing, because I when I think about the two of you, you know, you have been sort of positioned in this jazz tradition and so forth, but the last time I heard music by both of you was at an orchestral concert in New York, when you played with a violinist and a cellist in a piano trio, where improvisation and composition was melding, and you had the premiere of a concerto that you performed with the same orchestra. And so I just think this distinction that you are composers and not jazz composers seems both relevant and really, really prescient. So why was it so hard to get people to take you seriously as composers?
I don't think it was.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, here's the thing. When you say people, that's quite a plural, you know?
Point
Now-
taken.
Well, here's the thing. We developed from the AACM. From the AACM, we developed a following from the AACM. That's prior to anyone becoming world famous or whatnot like that. Including any of our groups, Roscoe's group, and all of it. We developed it because we were constantly producing concerts that featured different members at different times. Everybody had to participate in that round robin performance appearance type of pattern, a path. So now, people who like that, see, we're black musicians. So, and listen to this now, we're black musicians, and not coming out of the so-called classical world or the classical institution. So the first thing that people say is those are jazz musicians.
Right, of course.
That's the first thing they say. You know what I mean? They will accept a black musician that comes out of an institution. They say, oh, he was trained by, he studied with so-and-so, so-and-so. He's a classical musician, you understand? But now we have to confront the idea of the study of music. The study of music is quite free. I acquired the same information through seeking out the literature and researching and whatnot, the same literature that they teach people in the institutions.
Right.
Understand? We did that. Roscoe will tell you, we did that.
Sure.
We study. So we're musicians, you understand? Certainly we respect Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk and all of them because they, contrary to the word jazz, were great musicians in terms of total music.
Absolutely.
Composition and everything, see. So we have to be careful when we allow the word jazz as it is, how should I put it? Well, as it is used in the sense that it's used in a sense in many instances where it say that's not important.
Right.
And it doesn't take into the fact that these musicians are real musicians who are capable. I've written orchestra music, also all sorts of music. Of course, I've written for jazz band. I've written for all sorts of situations. Duke Ellington's the same thing, So I'm saying we weren't rejected by anyone except for people who just wanted to deal with jazz, or somebody that just wanted to deal with some funk. That's their right.
Right. Sure.
There are people musicians, who I know, very prominent musicians. He said, "Oh, them cats can't play. They can't play no changes." I mean, that's okay. That's in his mind. I'm not trying to play a chord change. I'm playing music.
Right.
I played chord changes for years.
But
But when I chose to do my original approach, but I'm not complaining about them. I'm just trying to address what you're saying.
Sure.
So your question, there's no real answer. If we're rejected, you have to go and investigate the rejecter, not the one that they're rejected because.
I'm fine with with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, so the association now has endured and flourished for 52 years and is still active today. And I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about what the association continues to do now within its various outposts, because it's all over the place now.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to back up to the New York thing, first of all.
Yes.
What you heard in New York is like a larger series of works that I have titled Conversations for Orchestra.
Right.
They come from my two CD discs on Wide Hive Records. And what I did was I set out to get people to transcribe these improvisations. And my goal with this is to even gain more understanding of the relationships that happen between composition and improvisation. So what you heard, the distant radio transmissions, was in a smaller version in New York. I just did that piece in Italy in a full-blown large orchestra, you know. So, and then, you know, and it was like, I had gone with Ilan Volkov to the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra and premiered my piece Nonea that started off as a piece for solo saxophone, and there I premiered it in full orchestra. You know, so I've taken that piece on a journey from solo saxophone through several different versions into full orchestra.
Right.
And then when he called me and asked me to come to Iceland, to Reykjavik, Iceland, I didn't want to go back there with the same piece, so then I got this idea to find these people to transcribe these improvisations.
I see.
And then, so what that did was it put me in a position to just generate a lot of pieces, you know. And some of them are like standalone orchestra pieces. Some of them have improvisational elements with them. For me, it's like inviting someone to come and improvise with Craig Taburn, Kaikanju Baku, and myself. So it's an ongoing process, the way it unfolds. And then it has different elements with it. If I'm playing with an orchestra that doesn't improvise, I have certain methods that I can use to add that improvisational element with it by inviting an improviser. And then if I'm working with an orchestra that does improvise, then that's another whole thing, you know. So, because you're getting a lot of people that cross over. They come from different avenues of music, but everybody's interested in the word improvisation.
Sure.
So, yeah, for me this year, let's see, I've got about 5 major orchestra performances in different parts of the world.
That's very, very gratifying to hear about. And so again, the AACM continues now, and you're still very active. What is the organization active in doing nowadays?
Well, now, just a moment.
Sorry?
Just a moment.
What did I step in now?
You didn't step into anything. It's a good question. You see, the organization has done what it set out to do.
Yes.
It's the individuals that are engaged in this activity, and also individuals who have been touched or influenced by the idea of expressing their individualism.
Right.
That's what's going on. You know, the AACM at best is, it always was, an example of what can take place in the musical world, in this sense, what can take place when an individual exercises his or her individualism, understand, without regard to attempts of outside interference. You know what I mean? To continue steadfastly on your path to do what you do. And that is what has brought this idea forward. The AACM is merely an idea that apparently influenced a lot of people in a very natural way. There's no AACM style. There's no AACM nothing there, but there's the idea. So when you ask that question, that's what it is. You know, these individuals, Roscoe just told you about things that he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm writing an orchestra piece now.
Mm-hmm.
George, the opera.
The opera.
Anthony Braxton doing something else. Tyshawn who has been influenced in the sense of that by that idea, but by no means he was that way before that. But that idea encouraged him. Let me say he's been encouraged by it, because it by no means is his manner of operation. He was encouraged. Oh, like when Roscoe say he heard Albert Ayla and Coltrane and Ornette Coleman, you know, it encouraged him to like be himself. So that's what has been produced. All these people that have been encouraged, you know what I mean? And we are not the only influential idea. There are many others. We just have to be talking about the AACM because it has lasted so long as an organization. You follow what I'm talking about?
Absolutely so.
See, it has lasted so long, so that's something to be noted. But we're not in control, not by any means, of all this activity.
I understand. I understand.
You know, I mean,
And so, speaking of activity, the two of you will be performing together with George Lewis as the trio. That's coming up Sunday morning here at the Ojai Festival. It's happening at 10 a.m., so be
Correct.
sure and get out here. And now what we're going to do actually is we're going to see a performance that happened at 9 a.m. this morning, one of the daybreak concerts that Ojai does, and it's by Nicole Mitchell, a former president herself of the AACM. Enjoy.